Mike Thompson stared out the shuttle window as the Galactic Academy of Sciences came into view. The massive space station looked like a shining silver flower, with its 5 giant arms spreading out from the central hub. Each arm was nearly 2 miles long, filled with classrooms, labs, and living spaces for students from across the galaxy. His heart beat faster as the shuttle moved closer. At 18 years old, Mike was the first human student ever accepted into the academy. He clutched the acceptance letter in his pocket, still finding it hard to believe he was really here. Approaching Docking Bay 7, the pilot announced, "Please secure all belongings." Mike double-checked his bag straps. Growing up in Colorado had taught him to always make sure his gear was properly secured. It was a habit that had saved his life more than once during mountain climbing trips with his father. The shuttle glided smoothly into the docking bay. As the airlock cycled, Mike took deep breaths, just like his mother had taught him. The air here would be different, cleaner and thinner than Earth's heavy atmosphere. When the doors opened, he got his first look at his new classmates. There were dozens of alien species in the arrival hall. Some had blue skin, others had multiple arms, and a few seemed to float rather than walk. Mike tried not to stare, but it was hard not to. Michael Thompson, a tall woman with graying hair, walked up to him. "I'm Professor Amanda Wells, the Human Exchange Program Coordinator." "Just Mike is fine, Professor," he said, shaking her hand. A few nearby alien students watched the greeting with curiosity. Mike noticed they kept their distance. "Welcome to the Academy," Professor Wells said with a warm smile. "How was your trip from Earth?" "Different than hiking the Rockies," Mike joked, "but at least no bears tried to eat me this time." Several nearby students made startled noises. One of them, a tall being with silvery skin, spoke up. "Excuse me, but did you say bears tried to eat you?" Mike turned to answer, but Professor Wells stepped in. "Let's get you settled first, Mike. Plenty of time for stories later." She led him toward one of the station's arms. "Your roommate is Robert Anderson, from the Alpha Centauri colony. He's human too, so that should help you adjust." As they walked, Mike couldn't help noticing how carefully the other students moved. Their movements were precise and gentle, as if they were afraid of breaking something. He tried to match their careful steps, but years of running on uneven mountain trails made his movements seem rough in comparison. They reached the living quarters, where a friendly-faced guy about Mike's age was waiting. "Rob Anderson," he said, extending his hand. "Welcome to the crazy house." "Mike Thompson," he replied, grateful to see another human face. "Rob will show you around," Professor Wells said. "Your classes start tomorrow." "And Mike," she paused, looking serious, "remember what we discussed about Earth's classification?" Mike nodded. Earth was classified as a Deathworld, Class 13, though he still found that hard to believe. It was just home to him. As Professor Wells left, Rob grinned. "So, fresh from Earth, huh? These guys are going to lose their minds when they find out what you consider normal." "What do you mean?" Mike asked, setting his bag down. "Let's just say," Rob lowered his voice, "that when I told them about my pet dog back home, 3 students filed safety complaints. Apparently, keeping a carnivorous predator as a companion is considered insane." Mike laughed, then stopped when he realized Rob wasn't joking. This was going to be an interesting year. As he unpacked his things, he wondered what his new classmates would think about the time he had to outrun a forest fire, or when his family's car got stuck in a blizzard. Maybe it was better to keep those stories to himself, at least for now. Mike's first real surprise came during physical education class the next day. The Academy's massive gym looked more like a science lab than any gym he'd seen on Earth. Strange machines lined the walls, and the floor was covered with soft, springy material. "Today, we'll test our new students' physical capabilities," announced Coach Lisa Parker, a fit woman from one of Earth's colony worlds. She looked at Mike with a hint of a smile. "Who would like to demonstrate the endurance course first?" The alien students moved back slightly. A tall student with purple skin and 4 arms finally stepped forward. "I will attempt it, Coach Parker." "Excellent, Tom." Coach Parker pressed a button, and part of the floor changed shape, creating a running track that floated in the air. 3 laps, standard gravity. Mike watched as Tom gracefully ran the course. The alien student moved smoothly, finishing the 3 laps in about 6 minutes. The other students clapped politely. "Very good," Coach Parker said. "Now, who's next?" Her eyes landed on Mike. "Mr. Thompson, would you like to show us what Earth natives can do?" Mike nodded and stepped forward. He did some quick stretches, noticing how light everything felt in the Academy's artificial gravity. "Same course, 3 laps," Coach Parker said. "Begin when ready." Mike started running. The track felt strange under his feet. Too soft, too springy. But after years of running mountain trails back home, this was nothing. He settled into an easy pace, the kind he'd use for a long hike. Halfway through the first lap, he heard whispers from his classmates. By the second lap, the whispers had turned into concerned murmurs. Mike wasn't even breathing hard. "He's not slowing down," one student said. "How is he maintaining that speed?" Another wondered. Mike finished his 3 laps in 5 minutes, barely breaking a sweat. When he stopped, he found everyone staring at him. "Is something wrong?" he asked, looking down at himself to check if he'd broken some rule. Coach Parker was grinning. "Not at all, Mr. Thompson. You've just run 3 laps in standard gravity at a pace that would qualify as athletic on most worlds. And you don't seem tired." "Oh," Mike shrugged. "This gravity feels pretty light to me. On Earth, I usually run in the mountains where the air is thin. This is actually easier." A student raised her hand. "Coach, is it true that Earth has higher gravity than standard?" "Yes, Emily," Coach Parker replied. "Earth's gravity is about 1.3 times our standard, which means Mr. Thompson here has been living his entire life in what most worlds would consider extreme conditions." The gym went quiet. Mike saw his classmates looking at him differently now. Rob, watching from the side, gave him a thumbs up. "Next up," Coach Parker continued, "let's test strength limits." She brought out what looked like a simple metal bar. This bar's weight can be adjusted. Each student will lift it to chest height and hold it for 10 seconds. The tests continued, with most students managing weights between 20 and 40 pounds. When it was Mike's turn, Coach Parker started at 50 pounds. "More?" she asked after Mike lifted it easily. "Sure," he said. They kept adding weight until the bar reached 120 pounds. Mike lifted it, held it, and set it down carefully. The gym was silent again. "Well," Coach Parker said, breaking the tension, "I think we've learned something interesting today about Earth natives." She looked at the class. "Can anyone tell me why Mr. Thompson's performance is significant?" Emily raised her hand again. "Because he's not using any strength enhancements or genetic modifications. This is just normal for him." Mike nodded. "Pretty normal, yeah. Though my sister back home can lift more than me." That comment started another round of whispers. As the class continued, Mike noticed his classmates giving him more space than before. Only Rob seemed comfortable standing near him. "Don't worry about it," Rob whispered during their next exercise. "They'll get used to you." They did with me. Mostly. Mike hoped his friend was right. He hadn't come here to scare anyone. He just wanted to learn. But he was starting to understand why Earth was called a Deathworld. Biology class was Mike's favorite so far. Professor James Miller had a way of making even the most complex topics seem simple. Today's lesson was about how different species adapt to their environments. Can anyone share a personal experience about adapting to harsh conditions? Professor Miller asked the class. Mike raised his hand without thinking. After yesterday's gym class, he had tried to stay quiet, but this was something he knew well. "Yes, Mr. Thompson. Well, I went camping in the Rocky Mountains last summer with my family," Mike said. It's pretty normal on Earth. The class went silent. Even Professor Miller looked interested. Please continue, the professor said, putting away his teaching materials. What exactly is camping? It's when you go out into nature and live there for a few days, Mike explained. You bring basic supplies like a tent, sleeping bags, food, and water filters. A student with green scales raised her hand. You voluntarily leave safe buildings to sleep outside. On a death world. Yeah, Emily. It's fun. Mike smiled, remembering the trip. We hiked up the mountain trail for about 6 hours. The weather was perfect, around 75 degrees Fahrenheit at the start. And at the end, Professor Miller asked, "Oh, it dropped to about 30 degrees at night. That's normal in the mountains. The air gets really thin up there too, so you have to pace yourself." The class was frantically taking notes now. Mike continued, "We set up camp near a lake. You have to store your food in special containers and hang them in trees." "Why?" someone asked. "Bears," Mike said simply. "They can smell food from miles away. You don't want them visiting your campsite at night." Several students made distressed noises. Professor Miller held up a hand. "You're saying you sleep in an area where large predators actively hunt." "Well, they're not really hunting us," Mike explained. "Bears usually leave humans alone if you make noise and store food properly. The mountain lions are actually more dangerous, but we didn't see any that trip." Mountain lions. Emily's scales had turned a pale green. "Yeah, big cats. Really good hunters. But the real trouble that trip was the weather." Mike remembered the excitement. A thunderstorm came up suddenly. That's pretty common in the mountains. "Did you return to safety?" Professor Miller asked. "No time." Mike shook his head. "We had to secure the campsite quickly. The wind was so strong it nearly took our tent away. Then the temperature dropped another 20 degrees, and it started hailing." "Hailing?" someone asked. "Frozen water balls falling from the sky," Rob explained from his seat. "They can get pretty big on Earth." "Right," Mike continued. "After the storm, we had to check for widowmakers. That's what we call broken branches that could fall on your tent. The next morning was beautiful, though. We went hiking, saw some elk, and my sister caught some fish for dinner." The classroom was dead silent. Professor Miller cleared his throat. "Mr. Thompson, are you saying this is a recreational activity on Earth?" "Oh yeah. Millions of people do it. My family goes 3 or 4 times each summer. It's a great way to relax and enjoy nature." Professor Miller walked to his desk and pressed a button. "Computer, please verify. Is recreational camping a common activity on Earth?" "Confirmed," the computer responded. "Earth records show approximately 75 million people participate in recreational camping each year." More silence. Then Emily raised her hand again. "Professor, I'd like to change my topic for the adaptation research paper. Can I write about Earth humans?" "An excellent choice," Professor Miller nodded. "Mr. Thompson, would you be willing to answer some questions for your classmates' research?" "Sure," Mike said. "Though this was just a simple camping trip, wait until I tell you about the time we got caught in a flash flood during a whitewater rafting trip." Professor Miller quickly changed the subject back to the day's lesson, but Mike noticed his classmates were looking at him differently now. Not with fear like after gym class, but with something that looked more like amazement. After class, Rob caught up with him in the hallway. "You really don't realize how crazy all this sounds to them, do you?" Mike shrugged. "It's just camping. It's not like I told them about rock climbing or cave exploring." Rob laughed and shook his head. "Maybe save those stories for next semester. I don't think they're ready yet." Chemistry class started like any other day at the academy. Professor Thomas Miller stood at the front of the room, surrounded by floating holographic displays of molecular structures. Today's lesson was about corrosive substances and proper safety protocols. "We'll be working with some dangerous materials today," Professor Miller announced. "Please put on your protective suits before we begin." Mike looked at the thin protective suit on his desk. It reminded him of the raincoats they used back home. He put it on carefully, watching as his classmates did the same with much more concern on their faces. "Today, we're studying Earth-like atmospheric conditions," Professor Miller said. "The simulation chamber will recreate various planetary atmospheres. Remember, these are extremely dangerous environments." Mike raised his hand. "Professor, do we really need the suits for this?" The room went quiet. Professor Miller adjusted his glasses. "Mr. Thompson, we're dealing with highly corrosive mixtures of nitrogen and oxygen, along with various trace gases. The pressure levels alone could be harmful." "Oh," Mike said, suddenly understanding. "You mean like Earth's normal air?" "Exactly." Professor Miller nodded. "Earth's atmosphere is one of the most corrosive naturally occurring environments known to." He stopped and looked at Mike more closely. "Mr. Thompson, you grew up in this environment, didn't you?" "Yes, sir. Colorado's actually got thinner air than most places on Earth because of the altitude." The professor walked to the simulation chamber and checked some readings. "And you breathed this mixture your entire life?" "About 21% oxygen, 78% nitrogen, with various trace gases." "Yes, sir." "Is that unusual?" Emily, who had become fascinated with Earth conditions since the camping story, spoke up. "Mike, most civilized worlds have less than 10% oxygen in their atmospheres. It's too reactive otherwise." "Correct," Professor Miller said. "Mr. Thompson, would you mind demonstrating something? Without your protective suit." Mike took off the suit and walked to the front of the class. Professor Miller activated the simulation chamber, filling it with Earth normal air. "Please tell the class what you observe." Mike stuck his hand into the chamber. "Feels like home. Maybe a bit warmer than Colorado, but normal." The class watched in amazement as Mike casually handled what they considered a deadly atmosphere. Professor Miller continued, "The pressure in there is also close to Earth standard, about 14.7 pounds per square inch." "That's comfortable," one student said in disbelief. "How do you survive such pressure?" "Actually," Mike said, "we get uncomfortable when the pressure gets too low. It can make you sick if it changes too quickly. That's why our ears pop when driving up mountains." Professor Miller turned to the class. "This is why Earth species are so fascinating. They evolved in what we would consider extreme conditions. Their bodies don't just survive these conditions, they require them." He pulled up more data on the display. "Earth's atmosphere is so reactive, it turns pure iron into rust. It can wear down solid rock. The pressure levels would crush many species' breathing organs. And yet we drink carbonated beverages for fun." Mike finished with a grin, remembering the soda he had in his room. "Carbonated? You willingly drink acid?" Emily's scales turned pale again. "Sure. Root beer, cola, Sprite. They're great. Want to try some after class?" Several students backed away slightly, but Emily looked intrigued. "Maybe. A small amount. For research purposes." Professor Miller cleared his throat. "While I encourage cultural exchange, please remember to fill out the proper safety forms before consuming any Earth-based products." As the class continued, Mike noticed his classmates watching him with new understanding. It wasn't just that he was strong or used to harsh conditions. His entire biology was built for an environment they considered lethal. After class, Rob found him in the hallway. "You just had to mention the soda, didn't you?" "What? It's just a drink." "A drink that could strip paint off their ships," Rob laughed. "You're becoming quite the celebrity around here, you know. The crazy Earth kid who breathes poison and drinks acid." Mike smiled. "Wait until they find out about hot sauce." "One terrifying Earth thing at a time," Rob said, shaking his head. "One thing at a time." The warning sirens woke Mike at 3 a.m. station time. Red lights flashed in the dormitory hallways, and a calm computer voice spoke. "Attention all students. Solar storm approaching. Please proceed to designated shelter areas." Mike jumped out of bed, already reaching for his emergency bag. On Earth, his family had always kept go bags ready for disasters. He brought the habit with him to space. "Rob, wake up." Mike shook his roommate's shoulder. "We need to move." Rob blinked awake. "What's happening?" "Solar storm," Mike said, tossing Rob's shoes to him. "Put these on. Grab your water bottle and ID card." In the hallway, students moved in panic. Some were crying, others were frozen in fear. Mike saw Emily trying to help younger students, but she looked overwhelmed. "Emily." Mike called out, "How many students on this floor?" 42, she answered quickly. "But some aren't responding to knocks on their doors." Mike nodded. This was just like the time his high school had to evacuate during a wildfire. "Rob, take the left wing." "Emily, right wing." "I'll take center. Check every room. If doors are locked, knock 3 times and shout emergency staff." They split up. Mike moved quickly down the hall, checking rooms. He found 3 students hiding under beds, 2 trying to pack their belongings, and 1 still sleeping through the alarm. "Leave everything except medicine and ID," he told them firmly. "Follow the emergency lights to the shelter. Stay together." The station shuddered as the first wave of the storm hit. Lights flickered, and someone screamed. "It's okay." Mike's voice carried over the noise. "This is normal in storms. Keep moving." Professor Wells appeared at the end of the hall. "Mr. Thompson, what are you doing?" "Room checks, ma'am," Mike reported. "Rob and Emily are checking the wings. We've found 6 students so far who weren't evacuating." The professor looked surprised but pleased. "Good thinking. The shelter is ready. Get everyone there." Mike gathered the students from Rob and Emily's sections. He counted heads as they walked, keeping the group together. In the shelter, he did another count. 42, he confirmed to Emily. "Everyone's here." The shelter was a large room deep in the station's core. Thick walls protected them from radiation. Students huddled in small groups, many looking scared. "Hey," Mike said loudly, "who wants to learn some Earth survival tricks?" Several heads turned. Even some who usually avoided him looked interested. "First rule of waiting out storms. Keep busy," Mike said. "Let's form groups. We need water checkers, food inventory, medical spotters, and entertainment teams." "Entertainment?" someone asked. "Sure. On Earth, when we're stuck in storm shelters, we tell stories, play games, sing songs, anything to keep spirits up." To his surprise, students began raising hands to volunteer. Soon, everyone had a job. The fear in the room dropped as people focused on tasks. "Where did you learn this?" Professor Wells asked quietly. "My mom's the head of emergency services back home," Mike explained. "In Colorado, we get all kinds of disasters. Blizzards, fires, floods. First thing she taught me was that panic kills more people than the disaster itself." The storm lasted 6 hours. By the time it ended, the shelter had organized water rations, created a medical response team, and even held an impromptu talent show. Mike's group had turned a scary situation into something almost fun. As they left the shelter, Emily walked beside Mike. "I've never seen anything like that," she said. "You weren't scared at all." Mike shrugged. "Storms are normal on Earth. Maybe not solar storms, but we get tornadoes, hurricanes, blizzards. You learn to handle them." "I'm starting to understand," Emily said slowly, "why Earth people are different. Your whole planet tries to kill you, so you learn to be ready for anything." "We don't see it that way," Mike smiled. "We just call it being prepared." Later, Professor Wells added a note to Mike's file. "Shows exceptional crisis management skills. Recommend for emergency response training. Earth survival techniques could be valuable to entire academy." The academy's main lecture hall was packed. Word had spread that Mike Thompson was giving his Earth history presentation today, and students from other classes had come to watch. After the solar storm incident, everyone wanted to learn more about Earth humans. Professor James Miller stood at the front of the room. Today, Mr. Thompson will present his research on Earth's historical challenges and human adaptation. Please hold questions until the end. Mike walked to the front, carrying a small data chip. He plugged it into the hologram projector, and an image of Earth appeared, floating in the air. "This is my home," Mike began. "Earth has been trying to kill humans since we first appeared, but that's also why we survived." The image changed to show a massive volcano. "This is Mount Vesuvius. In the year 79, it destroyed 2 entire cities, but humans rebuilt. We studied the volcano, learned its patterns, and now we can predict eruptions." Several students took notes. Emily's scales had turned a bright, interested green. "Then there's the weather," Mike continued. The hologram showed a massive spinning storm. "This is a hurricane. Winds over 160 miles per hour, enough to throw cars into the air. We get about 12 of these every year." "Every year," someone gasped. "Yeah, and that's just hurricanes." Mike changed the image again. "We also have tornadoes, which are like spinning air drills that can cut through buildings, and blizzards that bury entire cities in frozen water." The next image showed a city. "This is New Orleans in 2005. A hurricane put it underwater. People said the city was finished, but humans don't give up easily. They rebuilt it, made it stronger, and added better flood walls." Mike's images kept coming. Earthquakes that shook whole continents, diseases that once killed millions, ice ages that covered continents in glaciers. "But here's the interesting part," Mike said, showing a new image of modern Earth cities. "Every disaster taught us something. We learned to build stronger buildings, make better medicines, grow food in harsh conditions. We even learned to predict some disasters before they happen." He changed to a picture of his family camping. "And somewhere along the way, we started seeing beauty in the danger. Those mountains that could kill you with cold or falls. We climbed them for fun. Those oceans full of deadly creatures. We swim in them on vacation." The final image showed Earth at night, cities glowing like stars. Earth humans don't just survive anymore. We turned one of the galaxy's deadliest planets into a home. And then we started looking for new challenges among the stars. The room was silent when Mike finished. Then Professor Miller stepped forward. "Any questions?" Every hand in the room shot up. "Is it true humans eat plants that cause pain for enjoyment?" one student asked. Mike smiled. "You mean spicy food?" "Yeah, some peppers can be pretty hot." "And you really have weather forecasters?" another asked. "People whose job is to predict which disaster might kill you next?" "Well, that's a bit dramatic, but yes. My aunt is one." The questions kept coming. Mike answered them all, trying not to laugh at how normal everything seemed to him. These were just regular parts of Earth life. After class, Rob found him in the hallway. "Great presentation, though you probably should have left out the part about surfing in shark-infested waters. I think you gave Professor Miller a heart attack." Emily joined them, her scales still bright green with excitement. "I have so many more questions, like, how do humans decide that something trying to kill them is actually fun?" Mike thought about it. "I guess when you grow up on a world that's always dangerous, you learn to enjoy the challenge. It's just who we are." "Well," Rob said, "after that presentation, I don't think anyone will call Earth humans primitive anymore. Crazy, maybe, but not primitive." Mike grinned. "Wait until they hear about extreme sports." "No," Rob and Emily said together. "They're definitely not ready for that." The trouble started during lunch. Mike was eating with Rob and Emily when the station's lights flickered. Then the air suddenly felt different. Mike sat up straight. Growing up in the mountains had taught him to notice small changes in air pressure. Something was wrong. "Do you smell that?" he asked. Rob sniffed the air. "Smell what?" Before Mike could answer, red warning lights started flashing. The station's computer spoke. "Warning. Life support malfunction in Section 7. All students please evacuate to emergency zones. That's the main air processing unit, Emily said, her scales turning pale. If it fails. Mike was already moving. Rob, get everyone to the emergency zones. Emily, come with me. Where are you going? Rob called after them. To help fix it. Mike shouted back. He'd learned about the station's life support systems in engineering class. They weren't too different from the air filtration systems used in deep mines back on Earth. They found Professor Wells at the entrance to Section 7. She was arguing with the chief engineer. The backup systems aren't responding, the engineer was saying. The main processor is overheating, and the room's too hot to enter. How hot? Mike asked. 115 degrees Fahrenheit, the engineer said. With 90% humidity, no one can work in those conditions. Mike almost laughed. That's just like summer in Florida. I can handle it. Everyone stared at him. Professor Wells spoke first. Mr. Thompson, are you sure? Yes, Mom. Emily can guide me through the technical stuff through the comm system. She's the best in our engineering class. Emily's scales turned a determined blue. I can do that. Professor Wells looked at them both, then nodded. You have 15 minutes before we have to seal off the section. Mike stripped off his jacket and grabbed a tool belt. Emily quickly explained what he needed to look for. The main processor has 3 cooling rings. One of them must be stuck. Mike entered Section 7. The heat hit him like a wall, but he felt worse during summer football practice. He moved quickly through the steam-filled room, following Emily's directions through his earpiece. There, he spotted the processor. One of the cooling rings was indeed stuck. The machine was making a sound he recognized. It was like when his dad's tractor overheated. Emily, it's a mechanical jam. Something's blocking the coolant flow. Mike examined the machine. Just like a clogged radiator back home. Can you clear it? Maybe. Mike thought about how they fixed farm equipment during harvest season. You couldn't wait for perfect conditions when crops needed to be brought in. He used the tools to carefully open the cooling system. Hot steam burst out, but he was ready for it. Inside, he found the problem. Mineral buildup had blocked the coolant flow. Emily, we need something to dissolve minerals, fast. The cafeteria, she said quickly. Their cleaning supplies would work. 10 minutes later, Mike had cleaned out the blockage using cafeteria descaler. The cooling ring hummed back to life, and the room's temperature started dropping. When he walked out, covered in sweat but grinning, he found a crowd waiting. Professor Wells looked both relieved and amazed. How did you know what to do? The chief engineer asked. Mike shrugged. On Earth, you learn to fix things yourself. When equipment breaks down during harvest or a blizzard, you can't wait for perfect conditions. Emily's scales were now shimmering with excitement. He combined Earth farming knowledge with our technology. That's brilliant. Professor Wells smiled. Mr. Thompson, I believe you've just invented a new field of study. Earth-style emergency repairs. Does this mean I pass my engineering project? Mike asked hopefully. Everyone laughed, breaking the tension. As they walked back to the main area, Mike heard the chief engineer talking to Professor Wells about starting a new training program based on Earth repair techniques. You did good, Rob said when they got back to their room. Though next time, maybe warn me before you run into a death trap. Mike grinned. On Earth, we call that Tuesday. The end of the academic year ceremony looked very different from its beginning. Mike sat in the front row, wearing his formal academy uniform, remembering how nervous he'd been on his first day. Now, students from all species sat comfortably next to him, no longer afraid of the dangerous Earth human. Professor Wells stood at the podium, addressing the packed hall. This year has been one of remarkable changes at the Galactic Academy. Thanks to our Earth Exchange program, we've learned valuable lessons about adaptation, survival, and the true meaning of resilience. The huge screens behind her showed highlights from the year. Mike's physical education demonstration, the Solar Storm Shelter Organization, and a life support emergency rescue. Our Earth students have shown us that what we considered primitive survival skills are actually advanced adaptation techniques, Professor Wells continued. Today, I'm proud to announce that next year, the Academy will open the Earth Survival Techniques Department. Applause filled the room. Mike saw Emily's scales turning bright colors with excitement. She'd already signed up to be one of the first students in the new department. Furthermore, Professor Wells smiled. The Galactic Council has officially changed Earth's classification. While it remains a Class 13 Deathworld, it is now also recognized as an advanced survival training center. All emergency response teams in the galaxy will be required to study Earth survival techniques. More applause. Mike felt Rob punch his shoulder lightly. Look what you started, buddy. Professor Wells raised her hand for quiet. Mr. Thompson, would you join me at the podium? Mike walked up, trying not to look nervous. The whole academy was watching. When you arrived here, Professor Wells said, many thought Earth humans were too primitive for advanced galactic education. You proved that surviving on a death world requires intelligence, adaptability, and incredible resilience. Your performance this year has been outstanding. She handed him a crystal award. This is the first ever Earth Excellence Award. You've shown us that sometimes the harshest environments produce the strongest people. Mike accepted the award, then stepped up to the microphone. He prepared a short speech, remembering to keep it simple. On Earth, we have a saying, smooth seas don't make skilled sailors. Our planet taught us to be tough, yes, but it also taught us to work together, to solve problems, and to never give up. These aren't just survival skills, they're life skills. He looked at his classmates. Thank you for letting me share Earth's lessons with you, and thank you for teaching me that what we consider normal on Earth is actually pretty amazing. The ceremony ended with an announcement that made Mike especially happy. The Academy was tripling the number of Earth students for next year. His sister had already been accepted. Later, at the celebration party, Emily approached Mike with an unusual request. Some of us were wondering, could you teach us how to camp? Mike looked at the group behind her, students from various species, all looking eager to learn. You want to try camping? For real? We've set up a safety dome on the Academy's garden level, Rob explained. It can simulate Earth conditions. Well, mild Earth conditions. We thought maybe you could show us what a real Earth camping trip is like. Mike grinned. You know there will be bugs, right? And we'll have to build fires and sleep on the ground. We know, Emily said, her scales showing determination. We want to understand. Plus, we've all filled out the safety forms. In triplicate, Rob added with a laugh. Mike looked at the group of eager students and felt proud. A year ago, they'd been afraid to stand near him. Now they wanted to learn Earth survival skills. Real ones, not just theory. Okay, he said, but we're doing this properly. First lesson, how to pack a survival bag. As Mike began explaining the basics of Earth camping to his fascinated classmates, he couldn't help but smile. Earth might be a death world, but its lessons were now helping to make the galaxy a safer place. And maybe, just maybe, they'd be ready for his rock climbing stories next year.